The wind chime on my porch clicked like teeth in a cold mouth, while Jenna dragged her suitcases across the living room. The scent of cumin and hot oil hung in the townhouse, a stubborn ribbon in the late Sunday air. On the dining table, the cracked blue willow plate sat where I had left it, a thin vein of glue drying across the blue bridge. I had meant to finish mending it. I had meant to keep a lot of things whole. "Mom, do you hear yourself fry at all hours?" Jenna said, a bright laugh that tried to sound friendly and only came out sharp. "Everything smells like a diner." Her sunglasses were pushed up on her head like a headband. She looked past me to the small kitchen, to the scuffed baseboards, to the front hallway, where my key ring hung on a brass hook. Keys for the front door, the garage, the old tin box in the hall closet. One I had given her years ago after my gallbladder surgery because the nurse inside me believed in preparation, and because she was my only child. My sister Yolanda and her husband were there with a foil pan of enchiladas. They had not expected a scene. People never do. Mia balanced on the arm of the couch, tracing the cracked line in the blue willow with her fingertip. Noah played with a toy truck on the rug and made a soft engine sound with his lips. Mark kept walking to the car and back again without meeting my eyes, the way a man walks around a hole he knows he dug. "You still have the couch from when I had AOL chat," Jenna said, scooping up a stack of folded sweaters. "Vintage, right, Aunt Yo?" Yolanda smiled the way church ladies smile at funerals. "Vintage comes back in, honey." "Not this kind," Jenna said. "Cherry Creek has rooms that breathe." Her phone lit and a message from Victoria flashed so bright I could read it without trying. "Pool warming next week. Bring the kids." "You could take the end table," I said. "The one your father sanded. You loved that table." She did not look up. No space. When she laughed again, it bumped the wind chime outside the shells chattering. Mia looked at me with a question in her face she did not know how to ask. The townhouse was warm. The afternoon light lay across the carpet like a soft coat. That light had hosted birthday candles and spilled orange juice and a feverish forehead against my wrist. You can live 30 years in one house and still be surprised when it shrinks without warning. "Are you going on a trip?" Yolanda asked. She meant it. "We are moving," Jenna said loud now. She planted her suitcase by the door like a flag. "We are going to my mother-in-law's. A real house. No grease in the air. No damp walls. No broken whatever that is." She flicked her eyes toward the blue willow plate. "Mia and Noah need space that is not, I do not know, soaked in old." Noah looked up from his truck. "I like Grandma's house," he said, not sure yet which way the wind was blowing. Jenna smiled at him in a way that was not a smile. "You will like the pool more." The words folded into the room and settled over everything. Yolanda held my elbow. Mark returned with another box, cheeks flushed, ears pink. He opened his mouth and then closed it again. He had a face for apologies and no language for them. "Jenna," I said, "we can talk later." "There is nothing to talk about," she said. "You do not clean the vent hood. You fry everything. The closet smells like damp wood. It is depressing here, Mom. I want out." The wind chime tightened its little voice. Someone down the block started a lawnmower. The smell of cut grass slid under the cumin. I thought of the end table that had held so many coffee cups while I charted night shifts the way my husband had stood with sandpaper and coaxed out the grain. I thought of the key on that ring, the one with the small red bead Jenna had added when I gave it to her, and how easy it is to hand something over because you believe it will be used for love. Jenna swiped the suitcase handle up again. "Kids, say goodbye." Mia walked to me, first small and hot under my hands. Grandma," she said into my shoulder. Her hair smelled like purple shampoo. Noah pressed his face to my hip and could not decide whether to cry. Victoria's SUV idled at the curb, white and polished. She did not come to the door. That is not her style. "See you," Jenna said. And then, as if tasting the last line, "Your house, Mom. It stinks. It is stale. It is small. We deserve better." She opened the door. The shells knocked against each other and complained. The door closed. Yolanda squeezed my arm until it hurt. The house changed temperature by a degree. The couch sat where it always had, faithful and out of date. The blue willow plate caught a run of sunlight across its crack and turned it into a bright thread. The next 3 days creaked by. The townhouse kept its shape. I cooked once quietly with the window open. I changed the sheets on the bed the kids had used and folded them into the closet. At night I turned the porch light off and listened to the highway. Someone in a white SUV stopped at the end of the block 2 nights in a row and sat with the engine running. It is amazing what people think is invisible. On Wednesday morning, the bell rang hard enough to jolt the brass hook on the wall. I was still in my robe. The wind chime clicked, then went still like it was holding its breath. 2 officers stood at the door. A young one with a neat mustache said my name, Ruth Alvarez. The older one, a woman with a clipboard, clicked her pen. "We need to ask you a few questions regarding a theft report." Yolanda's words crowded my throat even though she was not there. I stepped back to let them in. The carpet had a clean line where I had moved the couch last spring. Things you notice when strangers are looking. "Your daughter Jenna Alvarez Grant filed a complaint yesterday," the woman said. "The report alleges that you removed from her luggage a pearl necklace diamond earrings and a white gold bracelet that belonged to her husband's family. The estimate lists the pieces at $250,000. The number did not land not for a beat. The words did. Pearl, diamond, bracelet. My fingers knew the weight by memory, my mother's pearls against my collarbone. My husband's gift in my palm before he died. The receipt from a jewelry store in 1993 that I had folded and refolded until it was soft. "I gave those to my daughter on her wedding day," I said. My voice sounded like someone else had borrowed it. "They were mine." "We will need any proof you have," the woman said. "Photographs, receipts, appraisals. You cannot contact the reporting party. Do you understand?" I nodded. The officers left their card in a swirl of air. The wind chime woke and scolded the empty porch. I stood with my hand on the brass hook for a long time. The key ring was warm. The red bead on the spare key flashed like a small warning light. When the house was quiet again, I went to the hall closet. I pulled the tin box down from the shelf. The lid stuck for a second because the latch is older than the townhouse. Inside lay the appraisal, the receipt, a photograph of my wedding where I was smiling too big, and the earrings flashed hard and true. In the edge of the frame, far behind me, the blue willow plate sat on a table under a plate of cookies. There was no crack then. I put the papers on the dining table next to the present plate with its white line of glue. I could smell the faint tang of it, a tiny chemical river drying steady. The computer took its time waking up. The screen lit my face in a pale sheet. My password was Jenna's birthday because habit is a river too. The bank site loaded and thought about itself. I leaned closer the way you lean toward a confession you do not want to catch. The balance blinked into being, 122,400. I sat back. In February, I had looked at a different number when I had thought about retiling the bathroom. The couch spring sounded under me. Air moved in the vent and smelled like dust. I clicked through to the transaction history. The list opened. February, withdrawal $20,000 at Cherry Creek Branch. March, withdrawal $15,000 at Cherry Creek Branch. April, 25. May, 20. June, 30. July, 25. August, 20. September, 25. 8 months, 8 lines, all at a teller window in a neighborhood I never go to on days I remember cooking dinner and reading to Noah and smelling Mia's hair. The wind chime rattled as if a storm had jogged it. The glue line on the plate had dried to a clean scar. The keyring on the hook felt heavier than it ever had. The cursor on the screen pulsed blue over another button I had not yet pressed. The list of withdrawals climbed the page like cracks in porcelain, clean and neat and inescapable. I scrolled again and watched the same numbers repeat the same branch printed in careful type. The room sounded too loud. The house felt a fraction smaller. I stared at the screen until the figures blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. The list did not change. I stared at the ledger until the numbers turned into a row of tiny doors I could not open. The house breathed a gentle push of warm air through the vent. The wind chime found a lazy rhythm outside. I closed the laptop, put both hands flat on the table, and felt the seam of the blue willow plate under my palm. I called Daniel Cho. He had handled my will after my husband died. He answered on the second ring. I told him what the officers had said. I told him about the withdrawals, the branch names lined up like marching orders. He asked for the facts, not the feelings. Dates, amounts, names. I read the ledger to him, my voice steady, my fingers leaving little clean ovals on the dusty edge of the tin box. He told me to gather every scrap of paper that touched those jewels. He told me not to call Jenna. He told me to breathe. After we hung up, I pulled the tin box closer. The latch stuck and then let go with a sigh. I laid everything out across the table. The appraisal with my name typed in a tidy serif. The receipt from 1993 with the store logo in a gold oval. A black and white photograph of my wedding, my head turned just enough that the earrings caught light. In the background, the blue willow plate sat on a buffet crowded with cookies and curls of paper ribbon. I ran a finger along the old paper. A little dust came away. The phone on the wall buzzed with a new message. Yolanda checking on me. I told her I was fine. It was the kind of lie that tastes like pennies. That afternoon, I walked the house with a trash bag and a pair of gloves. The kids had left wrappers in the couch cushions, a hair tie under the table, 2 crayons in the folds of the curtain. In the kitchen trash at the bottom where the coffee grinds lived, I found an envelope with a logo I did not recognize. White, thick, the kind of paper you pay for. Addressed to Mark Grant at my address. I rinsed my hands, dried them on my robe, and smoothed the paper. Inside was an invoice, specialist consultation, lab studies, and a line that ran high as a mountain total due $96,000. The letterhead belonged to a fertility clinic in a glass building near downtown. I pictured clean floors and the smell of alcohol wipes. I set the envelope beside the appraisal. It looked smug there, crisp and official. I could hear Yolanda telling me not to make up stories in my head. I did not have to. The paper spoke for itself. The phone rang before dinner. Daniel again. He wanted scans of the appraisal, the receipt, the photograph. He wanted the invoice. He would send a courier in the morning. He said he would file a counter-complaint for bank fraud and misappropriation if the paper trail held. He said we would also request security footage from the bank branches. His voice was even like a man reading a map. After I hung up, I sat back down and let the steam from a cup of tea hit my face. It smelled like mint and something clean. I wanted to hold the key ring in my hand to feel its old weight, but I left it where it belonged. Keys work because they stay where you put them. There was a flash in my memory that had waited in the corner for the right light. The day Jenna had taken me to see a doctor. She had taken me to lunch near City Park, a bright place with salads and water in tall glasses. Halfway through a plate of chicken with lemon, she leaned forward and touched my wrist. "You have been dizzy," she said, her voice careful. "You said so last week. Come with me, just a quick check." I had not said anything about dizziness. I let her pay. We walked 2 blocks to a corner building with a brass directory plaque. The office door had a frosted pane with the name Lowell Price, M.D. Inside, the air ran cool and flat. The receptionist had a manicure the color of clouds at dusk. We sat for 10 minutes, then a nurse in white sneakers took us in. Dr. J. Price was a slim man with a cologne that sat in the room like a third person. He smiled in a way I did not trust. He asked me what I had eaten for breakfast. He asked me the date. He asked me to name 3 objects in the room: the clock, the lamp, the pen. I told him I had come for a blood pressure check. He said these were standard questions for a woman my age. Jenna's knee bounced. She kept her eyes on the floor. He slid a clipboard toward me. The top page had clean margins and a header in bold. Voluntary admission for prolonged psychiatric evaluation. The pen clicked in his hand. I looked at the form, then at him, then at my daughter. I did not say anything clever. I took my phone out of my bag and pressed record. The light on the screen was a small red eye. I placed the phone on my lap and said I would not sign anything today. The doctor's face tightened. Jenna put a hand over the form as if it were a small animal she could calm. The hallway door moved a whisper of air, and somewhere a vent rattled like the wind chime on my porch. The moment went thin. We left. In the elevator, Jenna said he is a friend, Mom. He is just being thorough. I said my blood pressure is fine. In the parking lot, I could smell the heat coming off the asphalt, a sour rubber scent that belongs to summer. Now in my kitchen, I saved that recording to a folder and labeled it so I would not lose it. I could hear the pen click. I could hear my own breath. It did not sound scared. It sounded like a woman who had worked night shifts and knew how to keep her hands steady. The doorbell rang at noon the next day. A courier with a canvas bag took the papers and left a receipt with a timestamp. After he left, I stood at the front window and watched the street. A white SUV rolled by slow and did not stop. It turned at the corner toward the main road. After lunch, I carried a step stool to the front door and changed the lock. The screws squeaked a little. When it was done, I dropped the old brass cylinder into the tin box and closed the lid. The key ring on the hook felt lighter, a small miracle. At 4, Mr. Harlan from 2 houses down came by to borrow a clamp. He is a carpenter who never lost a measure. He asked how I was without asking. I lent him the clamp. On the way out, he said casual as dishwater that Victoria's SUV had been on our block a lot lately. The engine, he said, is too quiet to be neighborly. He tapped the brim of his cap and left. That evening, the phone lit up with a call from Daniel. His voice carried a current. He had used a contact at the district attorney's office to request the case file Jenna had opened. The file had attachments more than he expected. There were screenshots from Jenna's phone, messages between her and Victoria. He read me lines until the words felt like ice on the back of my neck. I took $20,000. Mom never checks her account. Keep it in cash until we can root it. When we hit 180, we move on the house. Robert is asking questions. He is weak. Children need a better inheritance than a cramped townhouse. Sell the pearls at Lodo Jewelers. Cayman account is ready. She is too sentimental. She will sign if we call it a routine evaluation. If she refuses, we create distance. Publicly. No one believes a bitter old woman. I listened. The mint tea had gone cold. The blue willow plate watched me from the table. The glue line was so clean it might have been part of the design. We will file our motion in the morning, Daniel said. Also, we are contacting Child Protective Services about the children. The messages mention coaching the kids. A social worker will likely reach out. After we hung up, I washed the cup and set it to dry. The house made those little settling noises old houses make. I wanted to call Mia. I did not. I opened the back door and let the evening air and the smell of cut grass and somebody's charcoal. The phone rang at 7. It was Mia crying in a small, careful voice. She had borrowed a phone. She said Grandma Victoria told them I had stolen jewels and that the police were coming to take me away. She asked if the house still smelled like oil. She asked if I would keep the wind chime. I told her I was here. I told her the chime was fine. I could hear a door open where she was. A woman's voice asked who she was talking to. The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen with the receiver still warm. The porch light clicked on by itself. The key ring on the hook swung once and fell still. At 10, Daniel called again. His voice was thinner than before, tired and fierce. He had pulled my old estate planning file. There was a separate investment account, the one I had meant to hand to Jenna when I was gone. 2.4 million long-term, quiet and steady, a thing I had never looked at and rarely talked about. The chat messages mentioned it by amount. They had a calendar note that said transfer North Glen title before Thanksgiving. He said the doctor who had tried to process me had a flag on his license now, a complaint filed. He said words like affidavit and chain of custody. I heard them, and also heard the shells on my porch quiet as breath. We hung up. I turned off the living room lamp. Then every light in the house went out. The refrigerator clicked to a stop. The wind chime knocked twice, not from wind, but from some small motion the dark makes. I stood still and waited for my eyes. The plate on the table held a thumb of moonlight, and the scar across it glowed pale. The key ring on the hook was a shadow with a red bead at its throat. The house held its breath, and so did I. The power came back with a cough from the refrigerator and a soft hum through the vents. I held still and let the house find itself again. The wind chime settled into quiet. In the blue wash from the window, the blue willow plate looked like a small moon with a thin white river across it. In the morning, I made coffee that tasted like tin and sleep. I called Daniel from the back step and gave him the names of the bank tellers printed on the withdrawals. He said he would file the countercomplaint at 9. He said a courier had already dropped the packet at the district attorney's office. He said words like urgent and admissible and chain. I listened and watched a sparrow hop along the fence with a piece of thread in its beak. Child Protective Services called at noon. A woman named Kendra spoke as if she were walking me through a room of breakable things. She said she had read the messages between Jenna and Victoria that referenced the children. She said she wanted to interview Mia and Noah as soon as possible. She said she would coordinate with Mark. After I hung up, I cleaned the kitchen to the sound of water in the sink and the radio low. I lifted the rug in the living room to vacuum under it and found 3 corn kernels and 1 glitter star. I placed them on the edge of the plate, a small, silly line of treasure, then brushed them into my palm. The day had a taste of metal. The CPS interviews took place 2 days later in a low building with beige walls and a plant that had seen too many hallways. I arrived early and sat in a lobby that smelled like crayons and hand sanitizer. A social worker told me kindly that I could not be present during the interviews. Mark arrived with the kids. He looked like a man who had slept in a chair. Mia hugged me hard and did not let go for a minute. Noah pressed his cheek to my jacket and did not speak. Mark thanked me for coming in a voice so soft I almost missed it. Kendra led Mia to a room with a small table and a box of markers. The door closed. I watched the second hand on the wall clock move. Mark stared at the floor. A cartoon played on a silent TV in the corner with captions on. The air vents made a sound like wind through a paper straw. When Mia came out, she held a piece of paper. She had drawn 2 houses. One had a square front and a little porch with a shape that could only be a wind chime. The other had a blue rectangle in the yard that was a pool. Between the houses, she had drawn herself and Noah as stick figures with their hands out. A line connected them to the small porch. She lifted the paper to me and looked at my face, searching. Noah went in next. The minutes stretched like taffy. Mark rubbed the heel of his hand over his eyes and then put both hands in his pockets. When Noah came out, he held a crumpled napkin with a crude pancake drawn on it brown with a darker edge. He pointed and said quesadilla. His mouth made the word like a secret. Kendra thanked us and said she would be in touch. On the way out, Mark paused with his hand on the door and looked sideways at me. His face had lost the pink it used to have. It was a chalk color now, with hollows in the places his cheeks once were. He opened his mouth and closed it. That night, I set 2 cups on the table by habit. When I noticed the second one, I moved it back into the cupboard. I ate a slice of toast. I left the crust. The house made that small, hollow sound old houses make when someone shifts their weight on the second floor, except there is no second floor. I waited for the phone to ring, and it did not. It rang at 8. Mark asked if he could come by. The words came out short like a man with a deadline. I told him yes. I told myself it was a bad idea, then went to the porch to turn on the light. He arrived with hair that needed washing and a shirt that had lost a button. Rain had laid spots on his shoulders. He stood on the mat as if the house were a church and he did not know the prayers. I brought him in. He looked around the living room without letting his eyes land on anything. Then he looked at the blue willow plate and the line of glue, and something in his face broke a little. He sat on the edge of the couch. His hands were open on his knees, palms up empty. He said things in a flat voice that did not need permission. He had lost his job in March. He had lied about June because it sounded better. Victoria had offered to cover them if they moved in and helped her with her own payments. He had signed papers at a bank with glass walls while a woman in a blazer said words like routing and beneficial owner. He had carried a velvet pouch into a jewelry store with a brick front in Lodo and walked out without it. He had watched Jenna count envelopes and fold them into a bag and call it responsible. I poured coffee and set it on the table. Neither of us drank it. The steam rose and thinned and disappeared. He said Victoria had a plan if it all fell apart. She would tell a court that Jenna was unfit because of stress and because of me. She would ask for the children. She would hold them like chips and make us all play at her table. He said the words and then seemed to realize he had said them. He sat very still. I opened the drawer under the microwave and took out the small digital recorder I had bought years ago to practice Spanish. I pressed play. The room heard Dr. Price ask me to sign a voluntary admission. The room heard my refusal. The room heard a pen click and a breath catch and the rattle in a vent that sounded like my wind chime. Mark listened with his mouth a little open. He put his hands over his face and then let them slide down. He said he could not fix what he had done, but he could tell the truth. He said he would tell the truth to anyone who asked. He said those words in the same flat voice he had used for the bad ones, as if his tone had only one speed left. I gave him the number for Daniel. He saved it without looking at his phone. He stood to leave, and then sat again, and then stood. He looked like a person learning how to move in a new gravity. After he left, the house was too quiet. I washed the 2 cups we had not used and set them in the rack. I locked the door and checked it twice. The key ring on the hook looked smaller without the old cylinder. The red bead caught the light from the street and made a little wound of color on the wall. The next morning, the CPS office called to confirm that Mia and Noah would begin weekly sessions. Kendra said the word anxiety twice. She said Mia had nightmares where 2 women the size of buildings stood on either side of a street and yelled while she covered Noah's ears. She said Noah cried when doors closed. She said they both missed the smell of my kitchen. When I hung up, I took the blue willow plate from the table. I wrapped it in a square of foam and slid it into a cabinet. I slipped the wedding photograph into the sleeve beside it. In the picture, the earrings caught the flash and burned like small suns. The plate in the background held cookies and a stack of white napkins. You could not see the crack because there was none. I left the house to walk around the block and breathe. The air had the clean edge it gets in Fall and Knife with no malice. Leaves clicked on the pavement. A dog barked twice and then remembered itself. On the way back, I saw fresh scratches on the wood by the front lock. Thin, curious lines like a child had drawn with a nail. I ran my thumb over them. The wood felt raw. Inside on the hall table, a manila envelope lay where there had been none. No stamp, no return address. The flap was tucked. I set it on the dining table and stood a moment. The wind chime knocked together once, twice, 3 times. I opened the envelope. A single photo slid out. My key ring on the brass hook. The red bead clear as blood. Under it, in neat block letters on a sticky note someone had written, "You will sign, or you will lose them." I took the photo of the key ring to Daniel in a plastic sleeve. He held it with 2 fingers at the corner as if the ink might rub off. He did not comment on the red bead or the neat block letters. He said he would add it to the file. He asked if there were more. I said no. He slid the sleeve into a folder with a label I did not try to read. The days moved in straight lines. Paper moved with them. Daniel filed the counter complaint. A clerk stamped things with a small square sound. The bank sent copies of withdrawal slips. Each one bore a name that was mine printed in a teller's hand. Each one showed the Cherry Creek branch stamp and the hour of day. Mid-morning, early afternoon. Times when I could picture myself in my kitchen rinsing a colander or pushing a vacuum or reading to Noah. The slips smelled faintly of toner. Child Protective Services delivered the written summaries of the interviews. The pages were careful and uncolored. They recorded the drawings, the smells mentioned the phrases the children repeated about bad grandma in jail. There was a line that said the children were exposed to inappropriate conflicts and parental coaching. The recommendation was supervised contact with me and a pause on overnights. The letters sat on my table beside the appraisal and the receipt from 1993 and the wedding photo that always made my teeth show too much. Daniel came by the townhouse the night before the hearing. He sat at my dining table in a shirt that had lost its crease. He asked for the recorder again and transferred a copy of the doctor visit to his laptop. He printed the chain of custody forms for the chat logs and placed them in a stack with a paper clip. He wrote 3 names on a yellow pad: the teller, the jeweler, the doctor. He said they would not all testify tomorrow. He wanted them subpoenaed anyway. He showed me the motion requesting the surveillance footage from the bank. The bank had replied that they had preserved digitals for the service dates. Daniel had marked timestamps in the margin. I made coffee. He did not drink it. He rubbed his eyes once and then straightened in the chair. He told me what would happen. There would be order. There would be the judge, the clerk, the gallery. Our exhibit tags were ready. He did not tell me what to say. He trusted me to say only what I had seen and held. He reminded me not to address Jenna or Victoria in the room, not to turn, not to answer the looks. When he left, the house smelled like paper that had been handled. I washed the cups we had not used and put them away. I pressed my palm to the blue willow plate as if the old glaze could carry a charge from my skin. I did not sleep long. Morning wrapped the block in a dull cold. I wore my navy suit and the scarf Jenna had once shoved into my hands at a school Christmas fair when she was 13. It was scratchy and bright and a little ugly, and for some reason that made it right. The wind chime made a single click as I pulled the front door closed. The keyring slid into my pocket with its small, familiar weight. The red bead kissed my knuckle. The Denver County Courthouse lobby had a polished floor and a tired Christmas wreath stored too early behind a security desk. The guard waved us through the metal detector. Daniel carried a case with labels tucked under the handle. My sister Yolanda and my niece waited near a column. Yolanda squeezed my elbow once and stepped back. She did not say good luck. She just stayed where I could see her. We sat at counsel table. The courtroom was not large. The air had that lacquered smell rooms get when the wood has been polished many times with the same cloth. The judge entered and took the bench. She had a square face that did not frown or smile. The clerk called the case. The rustle in the gallery settled into breaths. Jenna came in with Victoria and a man in a suit who carried a leather briefcase the size of a carry-on. Jenna had lost weight. Her blouse hung wrong on her shoulders. Her hands were clenched around a tissue. She did not look at me. Victoria wore cream and a scent that reached us before she did. She nodded to someone across the aisle as if this were a recital. The judge asked if counsel were ready. The man with the briefcase nodded. Daniel nodded. The judge asked if there were any preliminary matters. The man with the briefcase objected to the admission of the chat logs on authenticity grounds. Daniel raised the chain of custody forms and the affidavit from the forensic technician who had pulled the backup from the phone that had been presented by Jenna herself to the police. The judge admitted the exhibit. Daniel called me first. I walked to the witness chair and placed my hand on a book whose cover had been wiped smooth by other hands. I sat. The chair creaked. The microphone smelled faintly of dust. He asked me about the house in North Glen. He asked me about the years. He asked me about the day Jenna moved out the words she used, the way the wind chime sounded. I kept my answers short. He asked about the jewelry. I described the pearls, the way they lay cool against skin. I described the earrings, the weight in my palm, the slight tug on the lobe. I described the bracelet, the fine, barely visible clasp that had always given me trouble. He showed me the photograph from my wedding and asked me to identify the pieces. I did. He asked me who I gave them to and when. I said I placed them in Jenna's hands on her wedding day on our small porch while the shells tapped in a breeze. He asked me about the withdrawals. I told him the dates and the sums and the branch. He asked me if I had authorized anyone to withdraw those amounts. I said no. He asked me if there was any power of attorney. I said yes for medical decisions only executed after my surgery. He placed a copy of the document under a camera, and the judge read the language. The paragraph that limited its scope sat on the screen careful and plain. He asked me about the doctor's visit. I told him how the room smelled and how the pen clicked. I described the form. He asked if I had signed it. I said no. He asked if I had recorded that visit. I said yes. He played the recording. The tinny speaker carried the doctor's voice and mine, and the small rattle in a vent. The gallery was very still. Even Victoria did not shift in her seat. The judge watched the screen and then looked down and made a note. The man with the briefcase stood. He asked me if I had ever been confused about the day of the week. He asked if I ever forgot where I had placed my keys. He asked if I had ever let food burn on the stove. He wanted to stack my answers into a shape. Daniel objected to relevance. The judge sustained. The man with the briefcase asked if I'd ever had disagreements with Jenna about money. I said every mother and daughter has disagreed about something. He asked if I had any proof that the jewelry did not belong to the Grants. Daniel held up the appraisal in my name and the receipt from 1993. The judge admitted them. The man with the briefcase sat down and wrote something with a pen that made a lot of noise. Daniel called the bank records custodian. A woman with short hair testified to the authenticity of the withdrawal slips and the branch stamps. She read out the teller initials, the dates, the amounts. She pointed to the small camera icon that meant there was footage available for those windows of time. Daniel did not play the footage. He only placed the availability into the record. He called the jeweler. A man with careful hands told the court that on June 28, a woman had sold a pearl necklace, a pair of diamond earrings, and a white gold bracelet. He described the pieces and their condition. He matched them to the appraisal by the tiny flaw on one pearl documented in the report. He said the sale amount. He stated the funds had been wired to an account in the Caymans held by a company whose articles listed Mark Grant as manager. The man with the briefcase objected at the company name. The judge reviewed the wire record and overruled. He called Mark. Mark walked to the stand as if his shoes had learned a new step. He swore and sat. He did not look at Jenna. He spoke like a man reading a list. He confirmed the job loss in March. He confirmed the move to Victoria's house. He confirmed the schedule of withdrawals and his role in transporting envelopes. He confirmed the sale of the jewelry. He named Lodo Jewelers. He named the account overseas. He confirmed the meeting at the doctor's office and the presence of the voluntary admission form. He said he had asked if this was necessary and had been told yes. He said Victoria had described me as an obstacle and had laughed at the word sentimental. He said the plan, if this failed, was to establish that Jenna needed help and that the children should live with Victoria until Jenna was better. He said those last words slowly, like they were walking over a street full of glass. The man with the briefcase stood and asked Mark if he was trying to save himself. Mark said there was not much left to save. He admitted everything that was his. He did not soften his voice when he did it. He sat there and looked at the front of the bench as if the bench might look back. Daniel played one more clip. A snippet from the chat where Jenna wrote, "I took 20. Mom never checks." Victoria replied, "Excellent. Keep it in cash until we root. When we hit 180, we move on the house." The words sat on the speakers without echo. Daniel placed the printed screenshot on the overhead projector. The gray bubbles were clear. The dates in the corner pinned them to the calendar. Daniel said he had no further witnesses. The man with the briefcase called Dr. Price. The doctor came in without a white coat, but with the same cologne. He spoke softly. He said his evaluation was preliminary and in line with best practices. Daniel asked him to read the top of the form he had slid toward me. The doctor read voluntary admission for prolonged psychiatric evaluation. Daniel asked if he had explained the form to me before asking for a signature. The doctor said he must have. Daniel asked again. The doctor said he believed so. Daniel asked if he had received funds from Victoria in the amount of $50,000 for consultation services. The doctor said yes. He said the funds were part of a concierge package. Daniel asked where in the package a voluntary psychiatric admission for a third party fell. The doctor said it was common for families to seek clarity. The judge wrote something and looked up. The man with the briefcase called Jenna. She stood and took the chair. Her hands shook. She looked smaller than she had looked in my kitchen. Her voice was a thread. She said she had been under stress. She said she had wanted the best for the children. She said her mother-in-law had told her that all of this was an advance on what would come anyway. She began to cry. She said the house smelled like oil because I cooked. She said she had always wanted more rooms and better light. She said she had not meant to hurt me. She said a lot of things about meaning. Daniel did not cross her with heat. He asked her if the chat messages were hers. She said yes. He asked her if the plan to embarrass me had been hers. She paused and then said yes. He asked her who suggested the doctor. She said Victoria. He asked her who handed her the voluntary admission form. She said the doctor. He asked her who placed the envelope of cash on the kitchen counter the night she told me my house was small. She flinched and said she did not remember. He sat. The judge watched her for a long breath. Jenna stared at the microphone as if sound could be seen. The man with the briefcase argued that there was cultural confusion over inheritances. He used the words misunderstanding and family dynamics. He said Jenna had shown remorse. He said the doctor had performed within his scope. He said the jewelry was not definitively traceable because families have similar sets. Daniel placed the wedding photograph on the screen again and asked the court to note the pearl with the tiny imperfection visible even in a grainy print from the 90s and the appraisal describing the same flaw in an old hand that had appraised my mother's things when she died. The judge asked both counsel to approach. They did. The murmur was a river I could not hear. They returned to their tables. The judge looked down at the file. She read a few lines to herself. The courtroom felt like it was holding air in its lungs. I could hear a jacket sleeve whisper. I could hear a pen roll 2 inches and be caught. The judge spoke in a voice that was level and plain. She found Jenna responsible for aggravated bank fraud and misappropriation through abuse of family trust. She set the sentence at 5 years with the possibility of reduction for good conduct. She ordered restitution of the $180,000 with statutory interest. Jenna made a sound I had not heard since she was small and had fallen on a driveway. She folded forward and the tissue dropped to the floor, and no one bent to pick it up. The judge found Victoria responsible for conspiracy to commit fraud, receiving stolen property, and bribery of a medical professional. She set the sentence at 8 years. She ordered forfeiture of assets sufficient to satisfy restitution and fines. Victoria stood. She said something under her breath. The bailiff moved and she sat. The judge reduced the charges for Mark in light of cooperation. She gave him a 2-year suspended sentence with probation and community service. She referred custody of Mia and Noah to a separate calendar with CPS oversight and directed that the children remain with their father with supervised contact with me as recommended. She signed the restraining orders that Daniel had drafted and asked the clerk to file them before close of business. Daniel stood and informed the court that I had amended my will 2 days before. He said the investment account held for my heir would be divided among 3 charities. He said a trust in the amount of $500,000 had been created for Mia and Noah for education with an independent administrator. He said the North Glen house would pass to my sister's children. He submitted the notarized documents. The judge acknowledged the filing and had the clerk stamp them received. The clerk called the next matter. The bailiff moved. People stood and sat. The lacquered smell rose and fell. I felt my scarf on my neck and it was scratchy again. I stood with Daniel. He placed a hand near my shoulder without touching it. Yolanda waited by the aisle. My niece held her purse in 2 hands and did not look up. In the hall the sound was loud and bright. Someone asked a question with a camera in their hands. Yolanda kept a hand at my back like a fence. We walked out into the wind. The sun was thin. The air tasted like pennies and something green far off. I could feel the key ring in my pocket, the edges softened by time. I could feel the red bead where it pressed against my palm. I did not take it out. I did not need to look at it to know it was there. That night the townhouse was warm. I turned on the porch light and it shone on the shells. The wind chime moved once and then rested. In the kitchen the blue willow plate leaned in the cabinet wrapped in foam. I knew where it was. I knew the line across it was clean and white and not going anywhere. I washed a cup. I set it to dry. I opened the window an inch and let the air in. The house held me the way it always had walls and floor and a smell that belonged to a life. I sat at the table and listened to the quiet until the quiet was not a thing I listened to, but a place I was. Spring loosened the frost along the fence and made the wind chime sing softer. I painted the living room a pale peach that looked like warm light even on cloudy days. The new bathroom smelled like grout and lemon cleaner. When I opened the window, the house exhaled and took on the scent of wet dirt from the beds by the porch. The blue willow plate rested in a cabinet wrapped in foam, the white scar across it a quiet line that did not ask for attention. The kids came on Sundays. The first visits were at the family services office with a counselor named Kendra sitting in the corner and a clock that ticked too loud. Later, we met at the townhouse with Mark on the couch and a clipboard on the end table he did not look at. Mia drew in markers on printer paper and taped her pictures to the wall by the table. Noah lined up cars under the window where sun made bright rectangles on the rug. They ate quesadillas at the counter and burned their tongues and laughed. The kitchen took on the old smell of hot oil and cheese and cumin, not thick. Not heavy, just a line in the air that stood for all the afternoons that kitchen had already held. Noah licked the edge of a plate and said it was the crunch, not the cheese, that made it good. Mia asked if I still had the wind chime because she could not hear it at night anymore. I told her it was right outside and let her step onto the porch and touch the shells with one fingertip. Mark brought store coffee and stood up to give me the mug instead of handing it across the table. He did not speak much during the visits. He watched the kids draw and ate whatever I put on a plate and carried dishes to the sink when we were done. He turned his phone face down and did not check it. He used short sentences and left space around them. Letters came in a stack with a correctional facility return address. The first envelope was crumpled and the stamp was crooked. I read the first two in the kitchen and the third on the back step and the fourth at the table with my hand on the place where the plate usually sat. The words ran from apology to anger and then to nothing much. The fifth started with "I'm pregnant." I set that letter in the drawer with the tin box and closed it. I called Kendra and then Mark. He had known for 2 weeks. He said the baby was due in September. He had a list of costs and a plan for appointments and a new line in his voice that was a mix of fear and resolve. He said he did not want money, but would not refuse help for the baby. He said he could handle supplies and car seats and night feedings. He asked if I could help with the things insurance would not cover inside a place that did not bend. I told him what I could do. I sent what he could not ask for. On a Tuesday in March, I went to a small room in a downtown office building where a few people sat on folding chairs and drank coffee out of paper cups. On a table against a wall staff from 3 organizations laid out pamphlets. One was a legal clinic for seniors. One was a shelter for women. One was a fund for those who had lost savings to people who should have kept them safe. A woman with thin white hair and a cardigan that had seen too many winters took my hand in both of hers and held it for a long time without words. Later, a director read my name and said I had donated an investment account. I stood with my hands loose at my sides and listened to the clatter of cups and the rustle of coats and the scrape of a chair leg. Photos were taken. I went home with a paper program folded in my pocket. I adopted a gray cat from the shelter 2 blocks from the grocery. They said her name was Jubilee. She slept behind the toaster and woke up when the water ran and chased nothing in the hallway at 2 a.m. She pressed her small head into my calf when I reached for the kettle and sometimes batted the red bead on my keyring if I set it on the table. She weighed almost nothing. The house liked the patter of her feet. Maya's drawings filled the wall by the table. In one she drew the North Glen townhouse with a bright rectangle for the living room window. The porch showed a little dangling shape with crooked lines for shells. She drew the Cherry Creek house with a blue box for a pool and a black square for a gate. Between the houses, she drew a path that curved past a tree with dots for blossoms. At the end, she drew 2 stick figures holding up a ring of keys like a crown. She wrote Grandma in careful letters under the figure with the hair like mine. Noah drew pancakes that looked like suns and printed his name with the letters too close together. A social worker called to say the children were sleeping better. The nightmares were not gone, but they were less sharp. Mia said she could breathe when she heard the shells. Noah put his toy truck in the freezer once and then cried when it stuck to his hand. He came on Sunday with a bandage and a story about bravery that he told to the cat, while she blinked slow and unimpressed. When the weather turned warm, I sat on the back step in the late afternoon and watched the light move across the fence. The porch boards drank up the last of the snow at the edges. The air smelled like damp soil and the sweet iron scent of the hose. Mr. Harlan from down the street waved from his mailbox. He asked about the new bathroom and the paint. I told him it worked. He asked if the wind chime was tuned or just lucky. I said someone brought it back from a beach and I never asked which one. Mark found a job at a store that sold suits and belts and shirts in measured sizes. He came on Sundays in clothes that smelled like fabric sizing and cologne testers. He brought the kids snacks with stickers on the lids. He tied Noah's shoe and told Mia that math homework was like stacking boxes. He started to look like a person who had made a habit out of standing up. The days stretched and came back. I cooked what I could carry. I slept when the house did. On a Sunday in late April, Mia asked if she could see the special plate. I took the blue willow out of the cabinet and set it on a towel and unwrapped the foam. She touched the white line with a fingernail and then traced the blue bridge and the little birds above it. She asked what it had held on my wedding day. I said cookies and napkins. She asked if the crack came from a drop. I said no, it came later, and she nodded like that made enough sense. That night after the house settled and the cat chose the baseboard heater over the bed, I stood in the doorway and listened. The wind chime tapped as the air shifted along the porch. The key ring lay on the hall table because I had forgotten to hang it. The red bead caught a line of streetlight and put a small red mark on the wall. I lifted the ring and felt its weight settle into my palm. Then I hung it on the brass hook and turned off the light. The townhouse held its shape. The rooms did what rooms do. The wind moved and the shells said so. The plate waited in its cabinet. The keys hung where they belonged. The house breathed and I breathed with it. The kids drew and the cat chased shadows and the tea cooled in its cup. Outside, the fence separated our yard from the alley and the alley from the street. Inside, the clock on the stove kept good time. The spring air came through the screen and carried a faint smell of cut grass. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and listened until I could hear the smallest sounds, the tick and the small rattle, and the settling weight of something that had finally stopped moving. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.